You know, in preparation for this video, I couldn't find any videos talking about Zonic the Zone Cop. There are definitely a lot of popular videos where it's about Zonic or the Zone Cops, but an actual deep dive into him as a character in his world? I really couldn't find anything. I guess he was just in this weird space where people knew who he was, but no one ever really bothered to make a video talking about him. I guess that all falls on me now. Wait, I'm supposed to make these intros sound more professional and well written. Zonic the Zone Cop was a character who appeared in the Archie Sonic the Hedgehog comics, making his first proper appearance in Sonic Super Special Issue 8. He's a multiversal police officer tasked with the mission of keeping the balance of the entire multiverse, righting universal wrongs and making sure everyone stays put in their own universe. He operates with an entire crew of Zone Cops who all share the same naming scheme as him. Example, Zector, Zespio, and etc, etc. Oh, by the way, he's a dimensional variant of Sonic the Hedgehog. I don't know if you could tell because the mask kind of hides the quills.
Zonic doesn't really have any special abilities to note, as we never see him use any abilities that any normal Sonic would have, like super speed. He has a laser in his wrist and control collars that are used to dampen the powers of those with special abilities. He and any other person from his dimension, also known as zones, also have the funny quirk of being tilted at a 90-degree angle whenever outside of their universe, aka the no zone, due to it running through every other zone in the multiverse. Honestly, the most unique thing about Zonic to me is the person who created him way back in the late 90s, well-known comic writer Dan Slott, with James Fry being the one who created that design. I couldn't find any particular reason why Dan Slott came to write on for Sonic, so I'm just going to assume he needed the extra work. Dan Slott making a character of this type is extra funny considering what he would go on to do with Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse concept. Truth be told, I don't really have a lot to talk about character-wise with Zonic because, simply put, he never really gets the time to shine as his own character. He mostly exists to show up, direct Sonic to dimensional threats, and then send him home so that everything is wrapped up by the end of the story. He's more serious than normal Sonic, tends to be more extreme than Sonic when it comes to stopping threats. That's about it, honestly. Sadly, this issue is more so going to be a quick tour of Zonic's stories and the introduction of various lore bits that would make up his side of the Archie Sonic universe. Zonic would make his first appearance in Sonic Super Special Issue 8 in the story titled Zone Wars Prelude, written by Dan Slott and penciled by longtime Archie Sonic artist James Fry. We see Sonic Prime fighting against what appears to be a gender-swapped version of Dr. Robotnik, Dr. Ivana Robotina from the Luna Zone. Sally Moon, also from the Luna Zone, arrives to put a stop to Ivana before getting blasted away, with Tuxedo Nux coming in to take care of Ivana. What? Yeah, you said it.
Zonic then arrives to escort the Luna Zoners back to their zone. Zonic explains his presence to Zonic and how his mission is to maintain order in the multiverse by keeping everyone in their respective zones. Sonic gets pissy and says that he's never needed permission to go to other zones, with Zonic retorting that he's the one who sent Zonic to all those places in the first place, such as when Sonic met Anti-Sonic for the first time or teaming up with an entire multiverse of Sonics to stop a robotic variant of Robotnik. It's extra important that Zonic is active now, since Robotnik's ultimate annihilator ray has caused a small rip in the multiverse, causing zones to crisscross with each other. Zonic says that Sonic is the prime Sonic, the destined hero of time and space, before making his exit, leaving Sonic to ask the big questions.
Yeah? Well, if that's so, how come I didn't get the girl?
This story is a good premise with lazy execution. Sonic himself doesn't get a lot to do other than play audience to the multiversal shenanigans coming at him, with a few mild anime jokes before Sonic just heaves exposition all over the place. I'm not a fan of taking away some of Sonic's agency either by chalking it all up to Sonic did it, but I guess Sonic was still pursuing things on his own at the end of the day. James Fry's pencils are pretty expressive here, so at least the art does a lot of the heavy lifting. Sonic Super Special Issue 10, written by longtime Archie Sonic writer Carl Ballers, this marks the second appearance of Sonic, where he sends Sonic into the world of Sonic Underground to team up with...
Shut up!
Sonic and the Hedgehog trio have to fight against this universe's Dr. Robotnik, who teamed up with Anti-Sonic to rebuild the Giant Borg, a robot battlesuit that first appeared in issue 19 in the Night of a Thousand Sonic storyline. Sonic just says he forgot to include the Underground guys during those events.
Idiot.
Robotnik betrays Anti-Sonic, the heroes defeat Robotnik, and everyone goes back to their respective zones, with Anti-Sonic being locked up in Sonic's monitor room. This story is kind of ugly. and not really fun to read, which is a shame because I think Carl Ballers, while flawed, is leagues above that guy when it comes to writing, but the art here seriously kills it. On top of looking just plain ugly, characters like Dingo and Sleet aren't even colored right. It's always nice when Carl's stories include little nods to other Sonic media, which is impressive given the time these issue came out in, but otherwise, it's an unimpressive issue. We see Sonic's control room, him having a run-in with Anti-Sonic, and more dimensional shenanigans. Sonic Super Special Issue 12. This issue marks the return of Dan Slott on plot, with the actual script being finished by Carl Ballers and penciled by James Fry and Nelson Ribeiro. Sonic is in the middle of fishing when he's interrupted by Zonic in an anime reference I don't understand. Sonic says he's had enough of getting dragged into other zones' business and calls Zonic out on using other people to get what he wants. Zonic says that it's his job to maintain multi-dimensional order and that putting people where they're needed is just the best way to do that, including Sonic Prime, who is the true hero of the multiverse. Sonic isn't having it and tells Zonic to take a hike. Sonic ends up guilt-tripping Sonic into another mission, and the two make their way to a zone inhabited by giant monster versions of Sonic's friends. Oh boy. Sonic fights off a giant monster version of Bunny Rabbit, saving the city it was destroying, and he then comes into contact with a heroic version of Dr. Robotnik. He says that it's his fault that these giant monsters are rampaging across the world due to an experiment of his involving the splitting of a Chaos Emerald on Knothole Island, causing the Mobian population to mutate into giant monsters. In order to combat these monsters, the good Robotnik created a series of giant robot battlesuits which all need the power of a Chaos Emerald to operate. The one on Knothole Island, surrounded by monsters. Sonic hatches an idea to build a suit powered entirely by his speed, allowing him to head to Knothole Island to find the Emerald Shards. He beats back some monster versions of his friends before coming across a giant monster version of his own father, Jules the Hedgehog, who has the Emerald Shard lodged in his chest. Sonic accidentally kills Monster Jules by ripping out the Emerald Shard from his chest, flying back to the city while screaming in anguish, with the Monster Sonic coming across the dead body of his father. A parade is thrown to celebrate the first robot protector of the city, modeled after Sonic, of course. Sonic heads back to Mobius Prime, where he snaps at Sonic for basically abandoning him and not telling him that he'd have to kill his own father. Sonic says that Sonic has no idea what he's going through when Sonic takes off his helmet to reveal, oh wow, he looks like Sonic. This is also the first time that Sonic says his name to Sonic, making a sincere apology to Sonic for having to put him through such a traumatic situation before he disappears. So this story is absolutely insane, but it's also the first good Sonic story in my opinion. First of all, the art is much better this time around, with the action being pretty on point. The monster designs are very interesting to look at, there's a lot of energy with the movement, and the expressions don't feel too garish. Also, to my knowledge, this is the only Archie Sonic issue that shows actual blood. Like, look at that! That's blood! In my Talking Blue Rat comic! That's crazy! Sonic doesn't just play audience to the madness that's happening around him. He actually gets involved with most of the action and has a stake in the story. Sonic Super Special, issue 14. Oh boy. I'm gonna keep this brief because this issue is freaking ugly to look at. All the credits are people who worked on only one issue when it came to Archie Sonic. Sonic is framed for a crime committed by Anti-Sonic in the city of Legitoopolis, which is dominated by an Echidna police force and an AI version of Robotnik. Sonic beats up the bad guys, and Sonic blue balls Sonic before he can kiss Sally McAcorn or whatever. Sonic only shows up at the end. I just thought I would mention it for completion, and also because I want you to look at this bad art because I hate you. This would be Sonic's last appearance in the Super Special line of books, where he would be folded over into the main Archie Sonic book. His next appearance would be in Sonic issue 103 and 104, in another minor role. He just shows up to set up the story being in another zone than the Prime universe, with this one being a parody of the pre-MCU Guardians of the Galaxy, where they go up against Robolactus and Silver Snively. I don't really have anything to say about this story since I haven't read any classic Guardians of the Galaxy comics, but I do want to share this cute variant cover from the reboot that parodies the movie poster for Guardians of the Galaxy. Issue 112 has Sonic fall into Knothole Village through a portal after taking some serious damage, where he's taken to Dr. Quack to get some medical attention. Yes, that's his name. He's mostly ignored until the end, since the story is about Antoine trying to impress his father, as Antoine's dad keeps getting more interested in Sonic and how cool he is. Sonic takes notice of this and agrees to help Antoine win the favor of his dad. Sonic goes to see Sonic, who is now waking up, and uh-oh, Anti-Sonic is the one who put the clobbering on him, and now he's gunning for Antoine. So what does Antoine do? He smacks that fraud right in the face, allowing Anti-Sonic to be arrested by Zonic. This is kind of a nothing story, and once again, Zonic mostly just exists to set up a plot rather than being interesting character. It's cute seeing Sonic and Antoine acting like buddies, but that's about it. Also, since I forgot to mention it, this story was written by Carl Ballers and penciled by Art Mawini. Zonic would be absent for a decent chunk of the book before reappearing in issues 149 and 150. Zonic appears before Sonic and Tails to warn them of a looming danger that threatens to destroy the entire multiverse, with Tails being the only one who can put a stop to this. This evil threat is Mammoth Mogul. Mammoth Mogul is a longtime villain from the Archie Sonic comics. Basically imagine Vandal Savage from DC if he was magic and also a big giant elephant. The other Zone Cops are basically useless against Mogul, so it's up to Sonic, Zonic, Tails, and a whole army of multiversal Tailses to put a stop to this powerful pachyderm. Tails uses his magic Chosen One powers to fuse together with the other Tailses to turn into Titan Tails. Mogul is defeated and everything goes back to normal. Yay! This issue is kind of notable since it's the first time we see other Zone Cops outside of Zonic, but other than that, black! It's following up an ongoing plot about Tails being some sort of chosen one, but it was never interesting to begin with, on top of taking so long to have anything done with it. Mammoth Mogul is also one of the most boring villains in early Archie Sonic, and basically stayed that way until writer Ian Flynn dared to do something interesting with him. The art is... Actually, let me take one moment to talk about the art. Yes, it looks bad. The colors look nice, but the actual characters look kind of funky. I've often seen people list these issues as being drawn by Ken Penders, since whenever bad art exists, it has to be drawn by Ken Penders. But it was actually penciled by longtime Archie Sonic artist Art Mawini. Art had started off way back in the early 90s with the book, and was actually a storyboarder for the Saturday morning Sonic cartoon, which the comic takes heavy inspiration from. His early stuff is honestly really great, and perfectly fits the tone and style of those early issues. It was just that by the time Sonic Adventure rolled around and all of the characters had been redesigned, Art just never really got to grips with the new proportions and more action-oriented style. I'm not sure if no one ever gave him any notes or if he just couldn't do it, but his SatAM style just wasn't working for these new designs. If you want to see Art at his best, I'd recommend looking at Sonic and Knuckles, Super Sonic vs. Hyper Knuckles, and Sonic Blast, since I think they're really strong showcases of his comic work. In fact, go check out Archie Sonic issue 19 for another good example of his work, because it's basically a much better version of this story. Sonic teams up with an army of multiversal variants of himself to take on a deadly enemy that threatens the entire multiverse. The art is much better, the pacing is a lot smoother, and it's just a lot more fun to read. Back to this comic though, Zonic, once again, only exists to direct Sonic and Tails to a problem for them to fight off. I was already annoyed with this direction for Sonic's character, so I'm honestly glad that he never showed up again until issue 197 during Ian Flynn's run on the comic. Here we see Zonic and the rest of the Zone Cops in the ruins of the No Zone, trying to fend off against the attacks of Dr. Eggman Nega. Sonic winds up getting caught in the middle of this when he tries to bring in Scourge, aka Anti-Sonic, having just beaten the green baddie after a previous arc. Scourge escapes, and much of the action is Sonic and Zonic trying to recapture him, which they eventually do. Sonic asks why Zonic hasn't come to apprehend Eggman yet, since the Eggman of Archie Sonic was originally a multiversal variant of Robotnik called Robo-Robotnik. Sonic says that an Eggman or Robotnik is needed for the stability of his own, and Eggman shares most of the same history as that of Robotnik Prime. Scourge is taken into prison by Sonic, and Sonic heads back to Mobius Prime. While this issue is more of an epilogue to the previous Scourge saga and sets up the next long-term arc, this issue is pretty good. Ian Flynn injected the comic with some much-needed youthful energy, so now it reads more like a fun, all-ages action-adventure comic instead of 40-year-old men trying to write teenage characters. The layouts by Tracy Yardley and the pencils by Matt Herms create a nice-looking comic that's easy on the eyes and easy to read. It's also just neat seeing a more detailed look at the No Zone, since the version we saw previously was either reduced to a monitor room or hard to see with all the purple going on. Also nice to see actual Zone Cop versions of other characters like Zector and Zespio. Zonic himself doesn't get much to do, but the story itself is fun, so I don't mind it as much here. He's not actively annoying me with his presence this time. The excuse of Dr. Eggman Nega also offers a good way to keep Zonic out of most stories unless absolutely necessary. Since now, instead of popping in every so often to annoy characters about some multiversal disaster, he has his hands full with his own unfortunately named dictator. Zonic and the Zone Cops would be off-screen for another decent chunk of the comic, only making a brief cameo in Sonic Universe issue 21, where they rush by Mobius Prime while in pursuit of Eggman Nega. The Zone Cops would make their big return in the 4-issue arc following following Scourge's time in the Zone Jail prison. Scourge Lockdown. The Zone Jail is a prison meant to house dimensional offenders, where they're zapped of their powers using control collars to keep them in line. The prison is run by Warden Zobotnik with his assistant, Znivly. Other staff include a security team comprised of nameless zone cops and prison therapist Zeus the Bat. A decent chunk of the prison is taken up by anti-versions of characters from Scourge's home dimension, but there are other cute cameos here as well. Aw, look at Robolactus and Silver Snively, they look so sad. Even though Zonic only gets a handful of scenes, this arc is easily the best use of the Zone Cop concept. The Zone Jail is an interesting location with a slew of colorful characters roaming around and an interesting twist with the guards and the prisoners walking in different planes. Zobotnik is an interesting twist on Eggman since he and Zonic are forced to work together for the greater good even if they don't like each other or really respect how the other handles things. Zobotnik is incredibly controlling of his environment and looks down on his prisoners with contempt, wanting to beat them into submission so that they'll be reformed into something good. The rest of the Zone Cops in the prison don't really seem to care about the abuse happening to other prisoners, either ignoring it outright or being unaware. It's not really about them though, it's more so about Scourge and his little cast of villains needing to build themselves up to break out of Zone Jail.
Your clothes, milady, and I promise not to wear them this time.
Scourge and his Destructics break out of Zone Jail via a riot, leaving the prison in ruins. Zonic and his forces are too spread thin with Eggman Nega, leaving Scourge and his gang on the prowl. This would be Zonic and the Zone Cop's last appearance in the book, as they wouldn't reappear before the reboot of the Archie Sonic comics. Saga seemingly wants nothing to do with their out-of-canon Sonic stories from the past, so it's very unlikely that we'll ever see Zonic again in something official, even if Zonic's creator, Dan Slott, is open to the idea. Researching for this video kinda led me to the conclusion that Zonic kind of sucks. All of his early appearances get repetitive after the third time, and no story really ever delves into him as a character, outside of his morally questionable, look at the bigger picture mindset. His design is neat, the idea behind him, even if a bit played out, is neat in the world of Archie Sonic, and there is potential to have him be an interesting character due to how his job affects him and others. He just sadly never had the page time to do it, and sadly suffers a lot for it. I might not like Zonic that much as a character, but I hope any of you who do like him or have been curious about him like this video. If you want to read about Zonic for yourself, here's a little reading guide I made to hopefully make things easier for you. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.